Super Mario Odyssey is known as a non-linear exploration-based title, very similar to Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine. However, that's not to say that there aren't linear aspects in the game. Each kingdom, for example, has a primary story that the players are strongly encouraged to follow before moving on to the next kingdom. Cascade Kingdom has the lead up to the Madame Brutal fight, Metro Kingdom has the Mecha Wiggler and the festival, and so on for pretty much every kingdom. I say pretty much though, as there is one exception to the rule. One kingdom that doesn't really follow any sort of story. That kingdom is the Forgotten Isles, otherwise known as the Lost Kingdom. Welcome to another episode of Level by Level. Today we're going to take a look at the Lost Kingdom to see why it's so structurally unique from every other kingdom in the game, and how that works with its theme to make for a fantastic and memorable stage. As always for these Mario Odyssey Level by Levels, we'll start with the aesthetic, then move to the layout, then the story, and finally end with some of the notable moons in the kingdom. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more Level by Levels on Odyssey, then make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's jump right into the aesthetic. Just like many of the other kingdoms in Odyssey, the Lost Kingdom is a unique spin on a type of location Mario has traveled to in the past. This shares the most in common with the jungle levels in New Super Mario Bros. That's most obvious of course with the purple poison, which is the primary feature of this kingdom. Despite sharing similar set pieces though, the looks of these two are still quite different. The jungle levels in previous games were focused pretty heavily on being forest as well, with a ton of trees covering the background. While there are still trees in Lost Kingdom, it's certainly much less of a focus point here. In fact, we could say that the aesthetic for jungle levels in previous games were split between two different kingdoms. Lost Kingdom got the poison, whereas the tree aspect mostly went to wooded. I think this was a very good decision as it allowed for both of these kingdoms to build off of one primary thing and end up feeling very different despite them originating from a similar source. I mean, take a look at wooded and Lost Kingdom. Unless you're literally closing your eyes right now, they look completely different. Going back to the Lost Kingdom though, there's of course more to the aesthetic than just the purple poison. In order to further separate itself from not only the jungle levels that came before it, but also the rest of the levels in Odyssey, this kingdom played around with its color scheme quite a lot. The ground is a unique reddish brown and the grass on top of it is a super dark green. That makes the colorful plants on top of it stick out even more, including the trees, which are a bit brighter red and green than the ground. One other detail I really like are the clusters of butterflies that can be seen throughout the island, which adds a bit more color to the whole thing. The sky too also looks quite different from any other level in the game, having a nice mix of yellow and purple to help it stand out. Now compare all of what I just said to a standard level in New Super Mario Bros. Despite the purple poison, I'd still say the primary color of these levels were green, whereas the Lost Kingdom is a lot more focused on the color purple. That gives these both distinct looks from one another, which I think was very important in this case because of what the Lost Kingdom is supposed to be. Assuming you aren't illiterate, I'm sure you could tell by the name what this kingdom's main gimmick is supposed to be: lost and forgotten. The unique color scheme was crucial in getting that, as you wouldn't want this place to feel familiar at all, or else it wouldn't feel lost. I'd say it's even quite different from the other kingdoms within Odyssey itself. Now obviously every kingdom is already different from one another. I'm not about to argue that the city and the food world feel the same. Lost Kingdom though feels quite dark compared to some of the other kingdoms in the game, with Ruin really being the only exception. That's not to say it doesn't have anything in common with the other kingdoms in the game though, as it does share something pretty important with the rest of them: banger music. There are only 2 songs plus an 8-bit remix for one of them here, but what we did get was pretty good. Forgotten Isle 1 plays when we first arrive here and is fittingly intense for what the story has us doing at this time. Forgotten Isle 2 will be the main track played for the rest of the time though, and it's comparatively much more relaxed. I like them both quite a bit. I think I prefer the second one, but both do serve their purposes quite well. With that said, I think we've pretty much knocked out what I wanted to say for the aesthetic here. Now it's time to take a look at the level design itself to see how it helps make this kingdom feel lost. I want to start this segment with a criticism I've seen for Odyssey. Basically, some people are a bit annoyed by the fact that some kingdoms feel completely unconnected from the background. Take New Donk City for example, it's just sort of a floating chunk of land above a city backdrop. That can make it feel a bit out of place, and I totally get why that annoys some people. Personally, I never really cared since I'm a fanboy who ignores any potential flaws, but I did want to point this out because this flaw is entirely non-existent from the Lost Kingdom. The whole point is that it's supposed to be an island separated from the rest of the world, and that's exactly what is given to us in-game. Instead of being surrounded by the void, we are trapped by an ocean of poison, which is not only much more natural, but also fits its theme perfectly. We feel trapped on this island with no real idea of how to get off of it. While Lost is far from the only kingdom to not have this floating island issue, others like Wooded and Snow are also mostly free from this problem, I do think it was worth mentioning. As for the actual playable level itself, this is one of Odyssey's medium-sized kingdoms. If you've missed previous episodes, we could determine a kingdom's size based on its purple coin count. Large kingdoms have 100, mediums have 50, and small ones have none. Personally, I think this size is pretty perfect for the Lost Kingdom, giving it enough room to have a good amount of moons. Making it not too big also helps it out, as to me, it feels like it's more hidden away, whereas if it were the size of, say, Sand or Metro, I would have felt like there should have been a few more people here. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Almost every other kingdom has some sort of main resident to give it some personality. Luncheon has the Volbonans, Sand has the Toastarinans and the and so on. Lost, however, is one of the very few without a main local population. Granted, it's not the only one, Cascade, Cloud, Ruin, and the Moon don't either, but they all make sense as well, as they're either really old, abandoned, or Cloud Kingdom. I'm sure the reason this was done is pretty obvious. With no one to turn to, it's gonna make this island island feel a lot more lonely. Now let's move on to the layout of the kingdom itself to see how it works as an actual level. When you first arrive, you'll start out at the lowest portion of the level, which also just so happens to have the most trees out of any section. What I really like about this is how they completely block up your vision at the start, so you really have no idea what you're getting yourself into. The trees themselves are also very unique mechanic-wise from any other in the game. You could climb up them just like most other trees, but when you actually get to the leaves themselves, they are a bit different. Instead of just being able to go through them, Mario can actually stand on top of them, which lets him get a bunch of coins and do some other stuff we'll get to later. Interestingly, the leaves are also solid on the side, which means you can bonk on them. I really like how weird these trees are, it makes them much more memorable. It also makes the start feel a lot more dense with how far they spread from the tree. Once you walk past this opening shot, you're finally able to see some sort of path forward. Following along this path brings us out of the foresty segment of this kingdom and also gives us a few options as to where to go. If you decide to go left, you'll stick to the floor of the level, meaning you'll have to deal with a lot more poison to get the moons here. This is also a lot more platforming focused than the other path, giving this kingdom a solid amount of variety. Heading forward from the split though brings us up what I consider to be the main path. This gives us an introduction to a new mechanic, these ground pound platforms. Essentially, anything that has this symbol on it means Mario can ground pound it to race the other side. This is a fun mechanic to mess around with and is seen quite a bit here, so it was smart to introduce it in a safe environment with no enemies. Speaking of, once we actually climb up these stairs, we get our first real enemies of the kingdom, the Trapedals. Now for reasons we'll get to in the story segment, Mario doesn't have Cappy the first time he sees them, so for now they're just little obstacles that need to be avoided. Continuing forward gives us another ground pound platform, though this one is much bigger than before, showing how they'll be able to come in different sizes. Upon reaching the next layer up, we have a very intense jump across some poison, and we also get introduced to the main enemy of the kingdom, the Tropical Wiggler. This is also the spot where we get Cappy back in the story, which is smart as that makes the player want to use him right away on these new enemies, showing that they can indeed be captured. I think now it's as good a time as any to talk about the Tropical Wigglers, since they're pretty important for this kingdom's design. Their gimmick is that they're able to stretch forward, which is helpful for crossing this kingdom's many gaps. The first one players are likely to capture is this one right here, which they can use to go across the propeller platforms. This not only acts as a safe introduction since there's no enemies, but it also challenges the player a bit by making them have to time when their stretches are used based on the platform spin. I mean, it's not really hard, but you get what I mean. What I also like about this is how you could go forward up the path, or you could take a small detour to get a moon with this new capture. The Tropical Wiggler isn't required to get this moon, but it can be kinda helpful. Sadly though, our time with the Tropical Wiggler is short-lived as they aren't able to move up vertically, so Mario has to face this Trapedal on his own. Remember, this is the first time Mario will have Cappy when facing one, so out of instinct he'll throw Cappy at them and... Okay, so it didn't capture it, nor did it defeat it, so the player is now very likely to panic. Eventually though, the Trapedal will fly forward and either hit the player, fly into the distance, or if the player is lucky, it'll hit these blocks. Since they block your path, Mario will need them to be destroyed to move on. Hey, that's cheating! So normally Mario will need these blocks to be destroyed before moving on, which is good as it lets him see what the Trapedals can actually do for him. Also, yeah, despite me calling it cheating, I do really like that you can go around it if you've already played the game before. As most of you know, I really like speedrunning, so having speed strats built into the stage does make me very happy. From there, we can continue the climb up the mountain by facing another Trapedal and also getting an introduction to wall jumps. Yeah, the player is likely to already know about them since this is around the middle of the game, but just in case they don't, this serves as an important introduction as they're vital to the kingdom's final challenge in terms of its layout. Once wall jumping up the tutorial, we see a massive red button. Not only that, but it also has the ground pound symbol we saw in the rock structures earlier, giving the player a pretty good idea of what they need to do here. This spawns in a bunch of rocks and coins, which the player will be able to wall jump up to reach the summit of the mountain here. This acts as a good little test of the player's ground pounding and wall jumping skills. Obviously though, it's not too hard since it's just meant to give access to more of the kingdom rather than giving the player a moon. Upon reaching the summit, there's actually not that much here. Usually when a kingdom is building up to one location, it's because there's a big event there. Cascade has the Madame Brutal fight, Wooded has Spewart and Tortdrift at the end of its two main paths, but here it's just a hidden moon at the top of the tree and a shop. I honestly do really like the mix-up though. Despite being the main path the kingdom builds up to, it doesn't really feel like it is, and I think Lost not having a big center point to go to makes a lot of sense. Your reward for getting up here is really just being able to see the island below you, and since Glidon is up there too, you can also now travel to any point you wish. From here, there's no real one point that stands out, so in a sense, despite making it up the mountain, you're once again sort of lost as to where to go. Maybe I'm looking too far into it, but that's just how I feel when looking down at the kingdom below me. The aesthetic and the layout though aren't the only things that create this kingdom's theme, as I also think the story is an important thing to cover, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. The way we actually get to this kingdom is unique from most other kingdoms in the game. After leaving either Wooded or Lake, depending on which you pick second, you are given the option to go to Metro Kingdom. During the flight though, Mario and Cappy just so happen to run into their main target, Bowser. This causes them to have a detour over to the Cloud Kingdom, and after a pretty great boss fight, Bowser looks to be defeated. But uh-oh, it appears he was just kidding and proceeds to try and murder Mario and Cappy with his airship. This actually works and causes the pair along with the Odyssey to fall into the abyss below, thus concluding the game with the pair dead. How unfortunate. But what's this? It appears that Mario and Cappy were lucky enough to actually land in the Lost Kingdom. This introduction is perfect for the kingdom. Actually being in this area at all was a complete accident, giving the feeling of ending up stranded on a deserted island. Had this been a kingdom that you originally selected to go to on the map, the whole idea of it being lost would have made no sense, so the unique introduction was pretty necessary for keeping the theme alive. Since you were never meant to end up here though, this is one of the few kingdoms that Bowser didn't touch at all. The main conflicts everywhere else has to do with Bowser stealing something for his wedding and leaving the area in ruin. So if there's absolutely no Bowser interference here, what's the story? Well, in short, there's basically not one. When you enter into other kingdoms, there's a cutscene showing off the story moon, giving the player an idea of where to go. Lost doesn't have anything like that. You just start the kingdom by waking Mario up to see the Odyssey is destroyed. Cappy says that you need 10 moons to repair it, but with no story in sight, you're left to wander around aimlessly into the trees in front of you and search for something that can help you escape. This is an absolutely fantastic opener for a kingdom, and it makes this so much more distinct. Every other kingdom has either a story or a place you have to go to in order to progress, but here you are truly left to wander around the area, which I think is perfect for the theme they're going for. That's not to say Mario won't face any trouble on his way though, as upon leaving the foresty area he catches the attention of Klepto sitting up on a cliff. Right away, Klepto snatches Cappy off of Mario's head and flies on up the path, meaning Mario's going to need to fight him in order to get Cappy back. I just want to say I love the inclusion of Klepto here. He was first seen in Mario 64, where he actually does the exact same thing he does here, where he steals Mario's cap. In Mario 64, if Mario doesn't have his cap, he'll take extra damage. For some reason. Since Mario 64 though, Klepto has made a grand total of 0 appearances. That makes his comeback here all the more exciting, and it's also kind of funny that he's on the Forgotten Isles, seeing as he was sort of a forgotten enemy. Since Mario Odyssey is all about caps, his return was more than warranted as well, so I was happy to see him come back. In order to defeat him, Mario has to climb up the same path I mentioned in the layout segment, but surprisingly not all the way. You only have to get up to the first location with the tropical wigglers, which may seem a bit strange, but I do like that quite a bit. It ensures you don't have a set path in this kingdom for too long, as this is really just meant to be a small enemy encounter. You defeat Klepto by using the ground pound platforms which were introduced before, which is a good mini test of the player's knowledge on the mechanic. But after you defeat Klepto, you get Cappy back, the only real story is over, and you're still 0 moons closer to your goal of 10. I like that this doesn't give you a moon, because it really does just give off the feeling of, now what? You're once again left with no real goal and to just wander around, which is exactly what I love about this kingdom. Before moving completely away from Klepto in the story though, I do want to talk about this kingdom's major speedrun skip, which is one of my personal favorites in the game. Like I said, the encounter with Klepto doesn't give you a moon, so all it really does is slow Mario and Cappy down. That's obviously not what you want in a speedrun though, so very quickly runners develop what's known as Klepto skip. It's a very creative name. Basically, Klepto was only programmed to look at a small area in the kingdom to swoop down and steal Cappy. By using the solid trees on the mainland, Mario and Cappy can actually completely avoid this detection area by jumping toward the mountain. From there, they can jump scare Klepto to prevent him from trying to steal Cappy later. Every time I replay the game, I always do this jump. It's a lot of fun to perform, and it feels great to be able to skip the portion without Cappy. Compared to some other speedrun skips, the jump here is pretty straightforward. In fact, there's also an easier method with some of the trees closer to Klepto's detection range. Honestly, I wouldn't even be surprised if this skip was intentional. Either way, the intention doesn't really matter, just as long as it's in the game, and since it obviously is, I enjoy it quite a bit. But now that we've gone through the stuff that makes this kingdom's theming and layout so great, let's run through this kingdom's most notable moons. There are 35 total moons in this kingdom. Obviously I won't go over everything, but there are a bunch I thought were worth mentioning. Lucky for me, the notable moons are easy to figure out since I already ranked them all in my Mario Odyssey moon ranking video. First off, I want to take a look at the Trapedal moons. There are 3 different moons that use the Trapedals, each of them getting a bit more difficult as the player learns how to use them. The first is Wrecked Rock Block, which is fittingly found in the first area the player is likely to meet the Trapedals. As I said though, they don't have Cappy when they first arrive, meaning the player will have to come back around after finding out that the Trapedals can indeed break blocks during the mountain climb. The player is able to see one of the rocks glowing, clearly pointing to something hiding within it. I do like how the moon is placed in the back row, meaning the player has to either use 2 Trapedals, or they could try to hit it at the perfect angle to only need to use 1. It's difficult to do, but it's obviously faster than using 2 separate ones, giving this moon its own little speed strat. This scored at 227th on the moon ranking, so fairly high. Right above it at 226 though is the Caged Gold, our next Trapedal moon. This steps up the difficulty by having the moon placed far away from any Trapedal as it's isolated on the top of a tree in the poison. It's also not in a block but instead a cage, meaning the player doesn't know for sure that they need a Trapedal at all. This is a lot more focused on experimentation, and if the player does decide to use the Trapedal, they're rewarded with the moon, which is a nice little step up in difficulty. The final Trapedal moon is Line It Up, Blow It Up. This also places the moon far away from any Trapedal, however now there's an obstacle between the Trapedal and the block, being one of the ground pound platforms. The player has to do a little puzzle solving to find out that they need to hit it in order to clear a path for the Trapedal across the gap. This moon managed to land once again right above the others at 225. 5. I really like how all three of these work together to naturally expand on the Tropido's gimmick, with each one adding something new to make it more interesting. The Tropido isn't our only enemy here though, as there are plenty of moons that use our main capture, the Tropical Wiggler. Our main one, Moon Shards in the Jungle, is found at the left of the stage. This is the player use the Tropical Wiggler to cross over a sea of poison and collect moon shards. There are plenty of fuzzies to add some more danger as well, forcing the player to move quickly with the capture. Some of the moon shards are also hidden in really good spots as well, like inside of this tree and around the back of this other one. What I really like about this moon is the fact that it can be done captureless as well. It's pretty tricky to jump between the tiny platforms as Mario, but it lets this moon have a nice extra challenge to it for players who have already beaten the game before. This managed to land at number 148 on my all moons ranking, which is really good. In fact, only 3 Lost Kingdom moons were able to place higher than it for me, one of which being Get Some Rest, Captain Toad. This builds off the same area we were for the Moon Shards moon, however it's in a much more hidden spot. You have to wrap around to the very back of the area and then turn the camera to notice a small hole in the land that Mario can crawl into. Going inside reveals Captain Toad camping away underground. This is one of my favorite Captain Toad moons in the game just due to how well hidden it is. Add on that doing it captureless is also a lot of fun, and you have yourselves a fantastic moon. This was able to place all the way up at number 108. If you take a Tropical Wiggler across the propeller platforms, you'll gain access to another moon being Taking Notes, Stretch, and Shrink. This has you use the Wiggler's stretch to collect notes while the platforms spin below you. It's another fun one that uses the capture's mechanics in a unique way, and obviously it's great doing it captureless as well. One moon you can't do captureless is I Met a Tropical Wiggler, which requires you to bring a Tropical Wiggler over to a Bonitor. Since it's in a really weird spot though, you have to use the ground pound platforms to lift up the enemy to the right level, which is a cute little puzzle. There is another moon that uses the Tropical Wiggler on the surface of the kingdom, however it's quite far away from any of the other ones. It's found behind the starting area of the kingdom where the player can see a key floating in the poison. Obviously Mario can't swim there to get it, so he has to bring a Tropical Wiggler all the way over here to stretch and collect the key. A pretty solid puzzle, albeit slow, however this does have a speed strat that is super fun to pull off. Mario can throw Cappy on the mainland, jump off to collect the key, and just before he dies to the poison, he can make Cappy home in on the binoculars. Timing this correctly is very difficult, but it's one of my favorite speed strats in the game just due to how unique it is. The other Tropical Wiggler moons are found in this sub area. The main one gives the player a good challenge by forcing them to hit P-switches to reveal platforms under pillars of poison. They then have to quickly stretch between them to make it to the end of the course. The second moon shows off the Tropical Wiggler's ability to break bricks. Since there are so many bricks here, it feels super satisfying to break them all down. After doing that, you have to light a few torches with the Piranha Plant, which just adds another small challenge for the Tropical Wiggler. Overall, I think they did a great job with the moons for this capture. There's a lot of variety here, which makes them all pretty memorable moons in their own way. Alright, let's rapid fire through the rest of the notable moons here, cause like I said, there was quite a lot. This kingdom's second sub-area has Mario face Klepto once again, this time for a moon. Klepto will be flying over a lot of lava though, and in a much bigger space, making this a lot more difficult. Though you can just cheat this by using 2-player mode. The ground pound platforms were also used for some pretty solid moons. Spin pounding on them is super satisfying too. My favorite though is definitely inside the rising pillar, as you have to spin the camera around to the back in order to notice it. One other simple moon I also like is peeking out from under the bridge, which is just a lot of fun to jump for and try to survive afterwards. But to end off the segment, we have the Lost Kingdom moons that landed highest in my all moons ranking, those being the Koopa free running moons, which landed at numbers 48 and 47. This has the players race against the Koopas from the starting area all the way up to the top of the mountain. The reason I love this one so much is simply because you can integrate Klepto Skip here in order to get a super fast time. The long wall jumping segment at the end is a bit slower than I'd like, but otherwise this is a fantastic Koopa free running moon. But that covers everything I wanted to talk about for the Lost Kingdom. In conclusion, this is one of my favorite kingdoms in the game simply due to how well executed its Forgotten Isle theming is. Everything from the layout of the stage to how it's used in the story to even its moons help sell this feeling, making this one of the strongest thematic stages in a game filled with other strong thematic stages. So as for where it places on the Mario Odyssey level by level tier list, I think it's gotta be S tier. It's the lowest S tier simply because the others have a much higher amount of memorable moons, but I feel like it'd be a crime to place this in A tier. Its theme is so good and it's just so much fun to run around in that I think it more than deserves its S tier placing. But anyways, that's it for this video. Do you all hate this stage because it didn't include the Bramball enemy? Let me know in the comments. This was probably one of my favorite episodes to script in the entire series up until this point. I know it was shorter than some of the other episodes, but I still hope I was able to give this kingdom justice. Every kingdom I do though brings me closer to making videos on the really big ones, so I'm getting a bit nervous for those, but we'll get there when we get there. Speaking of big Odyssey videos, I've already started planning my next big video project, being a Mario Odyssey iceberg. However, before I can get started, I need a lot of entries for it. I already have over 100, but if there are any more cool pieces of trivia you think I should add on, make sure to let me know in the comments. Just start your comment with the word iceberg so I can see it. Also feel free to join my Discord server with the link in the description, as we have a whole channel dedicated to the Mario Odyssey iceberg there. But anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.